Hello, amateurs. Welcome to another episode of the Amateur Rugby Podcast, here to help soothe your Sunday morning hangover with some wonderful rugby chat about the grassroots of the game. I'm your host, Tim, and I've got another fantastic guest for you today. If you want to develop as a coach, then exposing yourself to as many different environments and approaches as you can will supercharge your progress. And today's guest is certainly doing that. Please welcome to the show, Mr. Tom Hicks. Tom, how are you?
I'm very well, Tim. Yeah, thanks for having me on. How are you?
Very well. You're more than welcome. Now, just to give the listeners a bit of an idea, what's your most recent rugby week look like? How many teams have you been involved in, training sessions, games, etc.?
Most recently, probably last week, I'd go with Monday nights. Wasn't actually there actively, but involved in the planning because I couldn't make it, unfortunately, with Quinn's under 14 DPP. Tuesday night was then Sussex Ladies. Wednesday was Sussex under 17s. Thursday was then Sussex Ladies again. Saturday was then Sussex Ladies away to Essex, and then Sunday was Sussex under 17s away to Kent. And then we're back at it again this week.
I absolutely love it. I mean, literally every day's a rugby day for you.
Pretty much, mate. Yeah, I mean, it's a good job I like the sport. Otherwise, I'd be a bit in the doldrums a bit.
For sure. Now, talking about the sport, let's get into that. How you got into it in the first place? When did you start playing? What's your kind of rugby playing journey?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously, like most people, probably started playing at school and then went on a few kind of rugby camps over summer. But in all honesty, mate, I was a pretty average player at the school. If anyone who knew me at school watches this, they'll know that I was your average rugby player. You know, was okay at it, not brilliant, but really enjoyed it. And that's kind of my entry point to the game was just school rugby, a couple of camps over summer, mainly so probably mum could get me out of the house, and then just watching it on TV. And it was only really after school then that I sort of started taking it really seriously. Fortunate enough to go down to Bristol for uni down there and played for Clifton Rugby. And that was my first kind of exposure of real top level coaching and a kind of performance based environment. You've got guys in there who have played national, international, who are in and out of academies. So some serious rugby being played there, and some awesome coaches too. You know, Matt Salter and Ed Robinson at the time were just brilliant coaches, and that was sort of the light bulb moment for me of I really enjoy my rugby, and I actually really enjoy trying to be as good as I possibly can be. And that I was there for 2.5 years, and sadly got injured in my last season, so it didn't finish the way I wanted to. But that was kind of my entry point into rugby at school, and then the entry point into kind of taking it more seriously and trying to progress was probably when I was down at Clifton about 5-6 years ago.
Well, it's a wonderful, amazing rugby city, and Clifton's a fantastic club as well. Talk to me a little bit more about that. You called it a light bulb moment. What was it that really intrigued you to try and sort of push on?
So it was probably down to the coaching. A lot of it, you know, Luke Nabarro was there as well, who's a sort of ex-Bristol player who just put a lot of time and energy into me, and so did Robbo. And I was, you know, off the back of, as I say, a pretty average school playing career. And it was when, you know, high-level players and high-level coaches were giving you the time of day to progress you and giving you feedback and being proactive with you, I realised that actually, you know, there's good people in rugby and you can go quite a long way with the help of good people. And that light bulb moment, was just me realising that, you know, where I'm at now doesn't necessarily reflect where I will be in 10 years' time. And that was really kind of a really cool moment for me, and that really sort of knuckled down and tried my best to be the best player I possibly could. And having said that as well, a lot of what Robbo did has shaped how I've started, you know, into my coaching career too. Just the way that he interacted with players, the feedback he gave. Like I say, even to players like me who, you know, no one special, wasn't in a DPP, wasn't in an academy, just, you know, your average guy at uni wanted to play a bit of rugby. He was giving you individual feedback week in, week out, and that's definitely shaped how I've approached my playing side and then also my coaching side too.
So what position were you, Tom, or are you? What kind of player are you?
I was a 9, so little gobby 9 for that. Yeah, definitely live up to that aspect of it. It's funny now when I'm on the touchline, especially around the county, and I see referees that ref me, and now I'm coaching, they just give me a little look outside of their eyes and say, "Oh yeah, I know what you're about." Thankfully, I've changed that. Hopefully changed that aspect of me. I'm not a gobby coach. I was just a gobby 9. And if I could, I like playing at 10 as well, but wasn't particularly grand at playing 10. So yeah, stuck to 9.
So you're officially completely retired now. Is that correct in terms of playing?
Yeah, mate. Yeah, I mean, I'll play a couple of times a year, mainly just for fun, really. But in terms of the playing side of things, I had quite a serious ankle injury at Clifton, and I had an interesting interaction with Mark Regan, who was coaching down there at the time, and my ankle just locked and planted, and it made quite a big crack, and so I sort of hit the panic button and started. Mark called it squealing. I wouldn't quite say squealing; I'd say maybe just shouting. And Ronnie stood over me and he looked at me and just went, "That better be broken, the amount of noise you're making." I thought, yeah. And I thought, yeah, luckily, and unfortunately, it wasn't. It was ligaments and that. But did the ankle, and then I did my shoulder, and also fractured my knee. So kind of in the 4 seasons that I played off the back of leaving Clifton, I probably strung together 7 or 8 games in a row before another big injury. And then I also found out that I actually just really enjoy coaching. I actually really prefer the coaching aspects of the game, and so just put all my time and energy into that. And someone asked me the other day, actually, do you miss it? Sadly, I don't miss playing really at all. So yeah, for me, I put a full stop rather than a comma at my playing career.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, that's so interesting. That like some really good coaching, and people that have invested in you have really inspired you to go on and do the same. So tell me a little bit more about, because you mentioned there you're a pathway coach. What does that mean exactly, and what are your sort of observations on the young players of today coming through?
So for me, it's kind of a twofold answer to what it means to be a pathway coach. But the overarching sort of principle has to be being player led, making sure that the player development is at the key. And so when even when you're working in a county environment where Sussex versus Kent, you want to win because it's a competition, but at the same time you've got to understand that the players are in a developmental phase. I mean, all players are always in a developmental phase, but particularly from that sort of 16 to 18 phase where they're like sponges and they absorb so much information, and they also absorb information without meaning to. So they'll pick up on how you communicate or how you talk or how you play the game or how you want the game to play, and that shapes them. So you have to be really mindful about being player focused and player led. What's going to benefit them the best. You also need to be mindful of coaching up and coaching down, or managing up and managing down, because you're in a pathway program. This isn't the end of their career. This is not, no player wants to just get to the county under 17 side or the Quins under 16 DPP. They've got bigger aspirations, and you as a coach need to have quite a grounded, firm control over knowing that they're going to leave you one day, and that's the goal. You have to sort of push your mindset towards being a springboard. Let the players go and explore things. Let the players experience what they need to experience, and then hopefully push them on to bigger and better things. That's what it means for me to be a pathway coach. Is basically a springboard for them. And always be player focused for sure, because if you're not and you start focusing on yourself and your own coach development, then you're not working well within a pathway program at all.
Yeah, interesting. So you mentioned there obviously them playing further and further and further. How much of your coaching is coaching for the game as it is today, and how much are you trying to sort of anticipate what the game might become in a couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously, no one goes out to lose on a Saturday or Sunday. So a lot of it is around, giving the players the tools to go and perform really well, whether it's as an individual or as a collective. And the way I look at it, I delve quite deep into the sort of statistics and the analysis of the game. And, I try and triage information, particularly to pathway players, about what they need to know that's going to make them more effective. Obviously, you need to nail in, the core basic skills of good rucking, good catch pass, the tackle technique, whether it's the set piece for forwards or the launch plays for the backs. Make sure they've got a firm grasp of those kind of core basics of the game. But then also try and give them information as to what actually does it mean to be a successful team in rugby. And I use a lot of things which are called tri-equivalents. And there's loads of videos and articles and stuff about them, but try and give it that sort of a good way of streamlining information for players. You say to them, okay, what do you need to look for in attack? And they go, well, we need to score tries. Okay, well, that's the top rung on the ladder. What do we need to do to get step one? And it's okay, look for a line break, or look, how many defenders have we beaten, or how many times have we offloaded it, how many meters have we made, how many times we've got into their 22. Give them those kind of information, those little steps, and that then leads hopefully to the top rung on the ladder, which is then obviously scoring tries and being successful. So for me in the pathway, it's trying to give them information, but try and streamline the information as much as possible to make sure that their behavior is channeled towards being successful.
That's an amazing bit of detail, because if they just judge themselves on how many tries they scored as as a team, then, somebody might drop the ball over the line 2 or 3 times in a game and they might think they've been unsuccessful. But their role in getting to that part is still vitally important to do repeatedly.
Massively. And I think I always try and devolve kind of feedback and positive reinforcement to players off the ball. For me, coaching isn't about the ball, particularly in rugby, because, on your side, there's 14 other people on the pitch who haven't got the ball, and there's 15 people opposite you that haven't got the ball. So it's all about off the ball work for me. So a lot of it is, did that line that you ran, you might not have got the ball, but, you run an in line, that defender's hips turned in and we went out the back. The player who's then, arced around and maybe got under the post and scored, everyone on the touchline will be cheering them. But as a coach, you have to really think about, okay, what they did actually led to the try. So that's, for me, a try equivalent, again, is something that you did off the ball was super important in us being successful. And in the pathway, luckily a lot of coaches will be clued in on that. They'll look at the sort of macro of the team. They won't just look at the one try scorer. They'll look at the player that had an action that led to that try by doing something off the ball, or maybe they cleaned that ruck really well and that led to a 1 second ruck, which allowed us to get around the corner a bit quicker. Again, you'll look at the player who maybe, drew the inside shoulder and flashed a pass across, and that's then the sort of highlight moment. But for me, the player that's hit that ruck and cleaned it really accurately is just as important. And in a pathway, that's crucial, because you need players that do every role of every aspect of the game really well. You don't just want finishers. You need players that can finance rucks, who can do set piece, who can run overs lines. They're the players that build great teams. And as a pathway coach, that for me is what you have to try and build by positive reinforcement.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I mean, it's certainly true that if you're stood in a pub with a load of rugby supporters, you can kind of tell which ones are the coaches, because they'll be picking out those little bits that actually make a real difference to the game. Is that your experience as well?
Yeah, hugely. I mean, a lot of the time, you see players, or you speak to people or players or coaches or parents, and you can get an understanding of people who know their rugby, in terms of what the laws are and what good rugby kind of looks like. But then the people that start talking about what different players do within the system that maybe be nowhere near the ball. Coaches that pick out, for example, how Chris Ashton, how he scored so many tries. People ask because he's a great finisher. Coaches will know, well, it's because he spends most of his time actually in front of the ball, waiting for that line break or waiting for that kick. That's how he gets so many, like Haaland, in the Premier League, always in and around the 5-yard box. He's scoring loads of goals, but it's actually his actions that underpin it. So you can always get a gauge of people that know and love their rugby and the people that take a real active, deep interest in their rugby by just what they perceive the game to be about.
Yeah, for sure. Now, we kind of alluded to it earlier. Obviously, these are young players looking to improve and move forward in the game. What kind of environment do you think they're going to be going into in the next few years? And I guess the second sort of part of that question is, are they very sort of aware of what's happening in the Premiership at the moment with teams collapsing very sadly?
Yeah, in terms of an on-field environment, obviously with the tackle height changes for the community game, which also affects the pathway program, the game itself is going to look a little bit different, certainly from July onwards. And as coaches, I'm part of a coach development group in Sussex, and we're formulating, disseminating kind of coach development courses around that tackle height. And it isn't just going to be on coaching that tackle height to be dropped. It's how can we exploit it? For me, offloads is going to be massively important now. A pre-season tour to Fiji probably wouldn't be a bad idea for some teams to go and learn how to offload.
That's never a bad idea, Tom.
Never a bad idea. But if you can sell it with a bit of tactical awareness around, you might get the funding. At least that's how I'm approaching it. And so the game itself on field is going to look a little bit different for sure. And obviously the 50-22 rule changed that too. And again, linking back to trying to give players as much information as you can that they need, is financing them with, what the tackle, like what the contact area is actually going to look like in the next 6 months, and then try and develop their understanding of where it goes through. So the on-field side of things is always developing. No one's ever. Eddie Jones speaks about, you're never going to play the kind of the perfect game of rugby. He's after it. He said he got close in 2019 in the semis, but he's never played the perfect game. So players are always looking to develop on the field. Then speaking to players in this pathway program, I can think of 2 or 3 conversations I've had this season around clubs going under, and it's tragic, it's sad. And I had friends who I knew at Wasps who 2 weeks earlier were happy days, doing well in the Prem. They've got houses up there, they've got families, and then suddenly bang, it's gone. And obviously watching them Worcester happen the same there. And when I was at London Irish last season, and obviously we saw in the press things that were speculated about the club, and it's a difficult environment to be in, and it's quite volatile at the moment. I think players in the pathway program are aware of it. I think parents are probably more aware of it than the players are. The players are still very much focused on performing on the weekend and trying to get in front of the right people to get to where they want to get to. Would I ever sort of discourage players from trying to be professional players? Absolutely not, because the game is a global game. There's so many opportunities within it to go and play abroad. The World Cup is I think it's the second or third biggest sporting event on the planet, including the Olympics, the Football World Cup. It's a global phenomenon of sport. I think it just needs a couple tweaks here and there to make it more financially viable. So players are aware. I think parents in the pathway are probably more acutely aware than ever before, particularly around then. Obviously, you've got the financial implications of clubs going under, but also then, the concussion sort of saga that's going on, injuries, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of things that I think pathway coaches need to be mindful of, particularly when you're managing, because you need to coach the players, but also you need to have a good relationship with parents too. And they're the sort of aspects that I think you really need to be focused on.
Yeah, for sure. Now, you mentioned you're involved with Quinn's pathway, but you're involved with Ealing as well, right? So how does that work? What do you do for each club?
So at Quinn's, I've been coaching Quinn's DPP, so 15s, under 16s, and then now the under 14s that are just coming through. So they went through their intake day, I think in January it was. They've now had sort of 5 or 6 sessions so they can then hit the ground running in under 15s. So they then have that 2-year project of under 15, 16 DPP, and then there's obviously the various culls that happen from 16, 17, 17 to 18, then obviously contract time. So I work at the Brighton base with a really good friend of mine, a great coach, Ben Pollard, who I've worked with at County and various different environments. And we, again, it's pathway coaching. So you get the information from Quinn's, the key aspects of what they want each player to be able to do, or the sort of environments that they like them to be able to operate within. So speed of ball is really key for Quinn. So a lot of the coaching is around that. So the role itself is ensuring that all of the players that we engage with have the feedback and have the sort of the tools needed to become a Harlequins player from a young age. And then with Ealing, I do that with in partnership with Cardinal Newman College, who have massively successful rugby school down in Hove on the seafront. So they just got to the final of the college rugby union and rugby league final. So they're deeply successful. They've built a really strong relationship with Ealing, and they basically run an EPP program. So it's an extended player program where players who aren't necessarily within the Quinn setup, who aren't in the Quinn setup now because they're sort of 16, 17 years old, but Ealing are happy to keep looking at them. So it's a similar role within that. You speak to Ealing regularly. They give you information about what they want to see and how they want to run the program, and you then disseminate that to the players and try and formulate the tools, the information, build players, or give players the ability to build themselves into a player that can play for Ealing Childfinders.
That's really interesting that it's very specific to the club. They're trying to build players for, their stereotype, their kind of ID, Talk to me a little bit more about the details of how many players would be applying for that kind of role, how many people want to get into the DPP, and how many actually make it.
I think to answer that second question of how many players want to get into DPP, probably I'd say majority of players in the county would like to be part of the Quinn's DPP at 14, 15, 16, and then arguably then into their EPDG or into the Ealing program. So many acronyms, but I think probably a lot of them, everyone would like to do it. From the sort of 14, 15, 16 stage, there's quite a large intake for Quinns, and they like to be quite inclusive because they're very mindful of development phases of players. A player at 14, might have sort of maybe the physical aspects that you'd like to see, but are very lacking in the skills, or vice versa. They might have the skills, but they're very lacking in physical aspects. So you bring them all through. I'd say probably at the Brighton base where I work, it fluctuates between sort of early 20s to 30 players, and you see them every 2 weeks throughout the season. And then there's sort of 5 or 6 other bases. So there's the Horsham, Worthing, Caterham, and then a couple of others in Surrey. So there's sort of upwards of hundreds of players within that DPP program. And one of the best days of the year is actually going up to Surrey Sports Park and doing the internal festivals. So each camp, so Brighton and the Horsham camp and the Worthing camp, they all put their teams together, and there's such a massive rugby festival, and there's some great rugby played there, and they're all wearing the Quins jerseys, and the kids obviously love it because they're playing at Harlequins training ground wearing the Harlequins kit. So it's a real positive environment for all of them. But that is sort of all about being as inclusive as possible, because arguably as well, the DPP serves as a community outreach program for the club, because you're suddenly having touch points with hundreds of families who then hopefully will then go up to the stoop and watch a game on the weekend. So it's sort of twofold, but from my focus is mainly on the on-field side of things.
Yeah, I'd love to hear a bit more about that finals day, so to speak. How competitive are the kids when they go up for that?
Oh, yeah, massively. I mean, you see, particularly nowadays, you're seeing kind of that difference between nature and nurture. You're seeing the two come together. You know, in all sports, you're seeing players now who start behaving like professionals at very, very young ages. You know, before we all know the story of kind of Johnny Wilkinson when he was younger, and he would be doing kicking in his garden before going to school in the mornings and looking after his nutrition. Now there's a lot of players doing exactly that at very, very young ages. So you see really competitive fixtures at under 14, under 15, particularly under 16 age group is pretty brutal actually in terms of how they're playing the game. It's brilliant to watch. The tough part is obviously you're there to assess as a coach, as a DPP coach. You're there to look for the players that you're going to then streamline into a 30-man squad that are going to go through to the next age group, or are then going to go and down to Bristol to play Bristol's DPP team, or up to Leicester to play theirs, or whatever. So there is always that aspect of sort of cutthroat nature of looking for players that are doing well or not well. But the rugby itself, I mean, sometimes you get a bit carried away. Sometimes you just drop your clipboard and you end up just kind of watching it because you think, bloody hell, this is actually a really good game of rugby. And I always try and say that to players. You know, if the game's been particularly good, I'll always get the players around and say, look, I just want to say I really enjoyed watching that. Thank you for that, because it was brilliant to watch. And yeah, that DPP day they're always really, really exciting days.
Amazing. Now, I've heard a few Premiership DORs recently talk about the hardest part of the job being those difficult conversations. Now, obviously, it sounds like you're a part of that process, at least, if not actually making those decisions. How difficult is that for you to have to, as you say, cull a number of players every single year?
It's really difficult because you can, you know, first and foremost, you know, I was a player, as I say, not particularly successful one, but I was still a player, so I still understand what they're going through, and they're sort of on tenterhooks almost. That's sort of the precipice of kind of anxiety of thinking about, did I do enough, or what could I have done, or am I going to get cut? There's always that worry that goes around performance environments, you know, whether it's the DPP program or the county program. When you're talking to players, I think it's always really positive, where you get the most positive sort of result out of it when you tap into what their goals really are. And when I say their goals, I mean that player specifically, not what the parents want or their older brother wants, or what that player actually really wants to achieve. Because a lot of time you'll see parents who will say, oh, he really wants to go and play professional, you know, what can we do to make him go? And the player sort of stands there quietly, just sort of, what you want to try and do is speak to the player. Okay, do you actually want to become a professional rugby player? Is this actually part of your dream, or what are your goals within the sport? Once you tap into that, you can then manage how you disseminate the information of, look, you've not quite made it this time around, and you can move it in line with what they want to achieve. Now, if their out and out goal is to play professional rugby and they're getting cut from the Quins DPP program, or they're not quite getting into the county squad for this year, it's really tough, and you don't want to furnish them with sort of false hope. But having said that, there are side doors that you can go through. You know, the Bucks Super League is now a supremely competitive, you know, league round of rugby in the university program. And when I was Irish, you know, they signed, I think it was 3 players straight out of uni, one from Exeter, a couple from Cardiff Met, who wouldn't have been in the Irish DPP program. They were just, you know, university players playing Bucks week in, week out. Don Brandt, I think, is a similar story. So there's loads of side entry points. So just because they don't make it quite at 16, it doesn't necessarily mean that when they're 22 that they won't necessarily make it. There's still a long way to go. They're going to develop a huge amount physically and mentally in that time. And what I also say to players is, and it's something that I kind of hold quite close to my heart, is a quote that I heard from a guy called Les Brown, who's a motivational speaker in America. It's, someone's opinion of you doesn't have to become your reality. And what I always say to players is, just because you've not made it in this environment, that is probably down to 3 or 4 people's opinions. You're going to play in front of hundreds of coaches in your career. You're going to play with hundreds of players. There are hundreds of other opinions that are going to be made about you. just because in this one moment in your career, you've not quite ticked the boxes for those specific coaches or that specific club, it doesn't necessarily mean the dream is over.
Yeah, fantastic. That's a really sort of positive way to leave it. And of course, the other side of it is there might just be 2 or 3 players that are going to play for the British Lions that happen to be in that squad at that time. So, it's a very tough situation sometimes.
For sure. And I think one of the positive things, we spoke a little bit earlier about sort of the dangers of being of rugby at the top, and how volatile it is financially for clubs and that. But, if your goal is to play at the highest level you can and earn a bit of money from it. There's players playing in that too that are earning pretty decent packages of money, whether it's sponsored packages. So if their goal is, because I think a lot of players, particularly sort of 15, 16-year-old players, whenever you do Q&As when I was working in the community department in Irish, you'd always do Q&As after camps and the players would come down. One of the questions the players would always get asked was, how much money do you make? How much money? So a lot of them are focused on being a professional and earning money playing rugby. They view that as the metric of success. Are you paid to play rugby? If that's their metric, then it's not the best motivation in the world, but fine. Just because you're not playing in the Prem, you can playing in Nat 2, Nat 3 even, and still earn decent money from it. So there's loads of opportunities for them to play. And like I say, I personally believe rugby is on the up, despite what's happened this season. And so I think the opportunities for people to become semi-professional, professional are going to increase. And certainly if you look globally, there's loads of, you have to look on Twitter for rugby clubs looking for players, and you'll get hundreds of them from Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Zimbabwe, Zambia, wherever you want to go. There's clubs looking for players. So there's loads of opportunities. And like I say, just because it's in that specific moment with those specific coaches that you've not made the cut, it's not over.
Yeah, that's a fabulous point about the travelling abroad as well. What an amazing opportunity to go and play for a club, get a bit of pocket money, see the world, and just an incredible life experience at the same time.
I wish it was something that I wish I'd have done when I was younger was go abroad and play rugby for sure. Because I've got players now that I've coached through the county programme, and then also they went into different sort of DPP programs and things, who then went to go and play Nat 2 with different clubs. And then now the off season, they've gone down to Australia for 6 months to go and play. You think, right, 19 years old, got a contract to go and play in Sydney for 6 months of the year. Why would you not do that? It's one of my biggest regrets. I never went and did that. So I always try and give those opportunities to players. Say, look, go and do it, because you're only going to enjoy it and you're only going to come back a better person, a better player for it. So there's so many opportunities. But in that sort of on that cold Tuesday evening at a DPP session, a lot of it can be quite dark for the players that don't make it. But like I said, there's so many other opportunities to go and progress for sure.
Yeah, I've had several people on the podcast that have played overseas for just a short period of time or a bit longer, and they literally light up when they start talking about it. It's like it's one of the best experiences of their entire life. So if anybody's listening to this and thinking about it, I would certainly encourage players to look out for that.
Absolutely. I know I still get jealous now when you look on, watch the videos on YouTube of the New Zealand schools rugby. You think, like, the opportunity to go and play in those environments. Why would you not do it? So yeah, for sure, mate. I'd reiterate your point there, Tim, of go and do it. If you're watching this, look for those opportunities, go and get after it, because you're only going to have a good time.
For sure. Now then, let's move on to coach development, because I understand you do a bit of that as well. What's your mindset to coach development, and how does it differ from player development?
So there's definitely some similarities for sure, but there's also some things that are unique, because you're dealing with different individuals who are obviously older, a lot of time more developed and maybe more set in their ways and their beliefs. So the phrase I always use when I'm starting coach development or coach relationships is collaboration. It has to be a collaborative approach where I'm going to get as much out of it as they are, and I always make that point to them that I'll pick up things from you that I've not seen before or I've not thought about. There's going to be a really good value exchange here. So it isn't going to be me coming in saying, do this, do that, or have you thought about doing that differently? Because that kind of sometimes puts coaches, up a little bit. So I always look at it as a collaborative approach, a co-coaching, rather than sort of a coach mentor or coach development, because immediately with those words of coach development or coach mentor, there's that sort of perception of coach and then development. And it's sort of, I'm here, you're here, and I'm trying to bring you up. But really, everybody's got different experiences and everyone's got different ways of looking at things. And so really it has to be a collaborative approach, particularly with coaches that have maybe been coaching for sort of 20, 30 years. I'm 27, so I've not been coaching for 30 years. I've got a decent amount of experience, but I'm also open to obviously being aware that there's going to be stuff that they've seen or done or heard that I won't have done. And so it's always about that collaborative approach.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me about some of the sort of inspirational coaches that you had and some of their techniques that sort of really impressed on you or made you go, oh, that's a great idea. I'll try and use that in the future.
Yeah, I mean, so probably the one that had the biggest impact on me, like I say, was Ed Robinson, who coached me when I was at Clifton, and the way that he interacted with players, like I said earlier, he was an energizer. It was fun to be in his sessions, and so when I then started doing a little bit of coaching, that's how I wanted to be. I wanted to make sure it was fun for the players that I was coaching, and then when I'm doing the coach development, make sure that coach is actually having fun, because the coaches have got to enjoy it too, particularly when you're doing coach development for in the amateur game or in the community game. The coaches they're not getting paid. They're there because they love it, or they really enjoy being part of the team and part of the club. So they need to be having as much fun as they can too. So setting them little challenges, setting them little tasks, or making sure that you're incentivizing them to keep developing and keep working with the players and working with themselves. That for me was a really big aspect of what I do, and that comes from Robbo, making the sessions just really fun and engaging, and making sure that everybody that's involved in the session is actively involved, feeling like they're getting value from me or from, as I was getting from Robbo, and also then I'm getting value from them too. There's always has to be that two-way exchange for sure.
Yeah. Something you just said there pricked my interest, giving them little tasks or things like that, because rugby coaching, there's so many things you could be doing, and there's so many things that could be correct and will work. That idea of giving people tasks just really focuses the mind on something very specific. Have you got any examples of that, or sort of examples of success?
Yeah, for sure. So my role, within coaching environments, is when you're with the head coach environment, is always be mindful of the coaches and the players. And so you'll set the players off on a task, in a game situation. You've then got, if you're fortunate enough to have co-coaches, you've got to work with them too. So what I always challenge coaches to do is to have a metric for success around an aspect of the game. So you'll have, if I'm working with you, Tim, and I'll say, Tim, okay, we've got a 10v12 setup, so we've overloaded the defense, so it's going to be hard for the attack. So what I'm going to really try and incentivize is line breaks. And if that can be your aspects of the game, mate, if you can look at how these players are going to generate line breaks and, give you information about kicks, if it's sort of going over the top, or offloads or lifts from the floor, or different runners at the line, these are your metrics. And what I'm going to say to you is, okay, Tim, what does success look like for you in this aspect of the game in the next 10 minutes? What can you do as a coach between minute 1 and minute 10 when I blow the whistle that's going to have changed behavior, that's going to make sure that your aspect that you've looked at is now successful? And that coach then, thinks about, okay, I'm now on task. I've now got a real clear message around what I'm looking at. I've then, you as a coach, have defined what you think success is going to look like and what you want to get out of it to make sure that it's successful. Okay, now I'm going to go and get after it. And that coach suddenly is then super engaged and focused on what it is they want to get out of this next 10 minutes. And then the coaching and the player, development just goes through the roof, because everybody is really focused on one aspect. And then you can start ticking off aspect after aspect after aspect. And the coach is continually thinking. You've had 10 minutes there thinking really deeply about line breaks. Another coach might have had 10 minutes really thinking about entry point to the ruck. The other coach might be thinking really deeply for 10 minutes about the kicking game. And suddenly you're developing coaches without having to do a PowerPoint presentation. They're doing it on task.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, I've done some coaching myself, as you may be aware, and that kind of level of detail I think is so important, because kind of as I led into this question, there's so much that you could be doing, and often, like, it's a paradox of choice. You end up doing almost nothing, or you just do the same thing over and over. Is that something you've sort of seen, or?
Yeah, massively. I think, some coaches, I mean, don't be wrong, I'm always sympathetic with coaches, because particularly in the amateur game, because it's a Tuesday night, you've been at work all day, maybe you're not a professional coach, you've been in the office or on site all day, you've come in the evening, the kids might be all over the place, whatever. You've then got to try and focus them in. So I'm always aware that, sometimes coaches will throw the ball and go, right, let's go and play a game, which is brilliant. My sessions are always game focused, very little drill stuff, and only when you really need to focus on a skill aspect. But if you throw them into the game, brilliant, that's fine. But I'll always then say to coaches, okay, what do you want to get out of this game? What is it that you're really looking for that that has driven you to push them into this environment. And so even when you're looking at a game, just a game, challenge the coach to look at an aspect of it and make sure that they then get some value out of it. Because as you say, there's so many things you can look at, so many aspects in rugby. Like I said earlier, you're never going to get the perfect game because there's always a set piece that could be a bit more accurate. There's always a pass that could have been landed a bit better. You're never going to be perfect. So there's always things to look at. But as a coach, if you try and think on a macro scale the whole time, I need to look at the set piece, or that the backs aren't deep enough and the rucks aren't there, you can kind of get, it can unravel a little bit. So just try and be really focused on what it is you want to achieve and then go and do it. And as a co-coach or coach developer, it's about ensuring that the coach can then spend as much time as they need to on task. And so being specific is really key for me. I mean, I think it's the Royal Marines have that saying of aim small, miss small. When you're coaching rugby, it's the same principle. Think about one aspect you want to nail, because you're not going to nail everything in one session. So nail that off, tick it off. Always come back to it, week on week, to ensure the retention rate is there, particularly in the amateur game when you only have an hour and a half on a Tuesday night and then you play on Sunday. So the time on task isn't that long. So you always have to keep reiterating things and reaffirming things, but just be specific along the way, because as you say, there's so much you can coach, but don't try and bite off more than you can chew week in, week out, because otherwise you end up just juggling, hundreds of different aspects, and then you end up don't getting much out of it, and neither do the players.
Yeah, good call. Now let's talk about a slightly different rugby environment. I understand you're doing some coaching with Ollie Phillips and Tom Mitchell in the sevens realm. Two guys with incredible experience there in sevens, particularly. What's that experience been like for you, and what are some of the learnings you've had?
Oh, it's been brilliant. So yeah, we're part of the Matt Ratana Foundation sevens team, so the TOA sevens, Ratana TOA sevens, and we're going into the sort of elite comps. We've been at Egg Chasers, we're at Sunshine Sevens, we're going down to Froome in a couple of weeks' time, and then we've got the Lit Sevens to finish the season. So it's a busy season for us. But working with two guys that have been to the very top in the game, Olympians, professional players, both, and captaining the country, for me is such a massive learning experience, because just seeing again how they interact with people and players, and how humble they both were. These guys you could understand if they were sort of a bit straight faced and whatever, coming down, but they're coming down to help out, and coach a team that we're a performance team, but we're not on the level of the Wild Dogs or Samurai just yet. We're hoping to be in a few years' time, but particularly Tom as well, who's only just come out of the game, and is still playing a little bit, here and there. The way that he interacts with people, he's such an energizer, and that's something that I really, particularly now at the end of a long season, when I'm coaching sort of 4 or 5 nights a week sometimes, having someone that just builds energy like Tom does is fantastic, and the players just feed off that. And I firmly believe, we won I think it was the bowl we won at Egg Chasers. We beat Nigeria in the final. I firmly believe a huge part of that was down to the energy that Tom gave the players, because it was raining sideways all day. Everyone is soggy. It's been a long season. It was not the perfect weather for sevens. And yet Tommy was there, just energizing players. And that's something that I really took away from it, thinking, it's such an important aspect, particularly on a sevens day where you're there from 9 till sort of 6 in the evening. Continue making sure that the players are furnished with positive energy, allows them then to go and get to the next level and bring home a trophy. And so it's been brilliant. And Ollie as well, he's measured, deep understanding of the game. He's obviously just come back from doing the national program in China, so big learning experience for him. So it was interesting to pick his brains about what he experienced over there and how things are a bit different and what he learned from it, as well as then he doing the stuff with the Wales performance program in the women's game. These guys have got unreal CVs, so just the chance to tap into a little bit of their knowledge is just brilliant.
Yeah, fantastic. The bit I want to talk about though is the energy side of it. For you, obviously you're coaching a lot, Tom. So how do you maintain that energy? How do you kind of switch it on and then switch it off if you need to? How does that work for you?
Well, the switching off aspect is probably something I need to work on. I'd say probably I'll ask my partner, and probably don't switch off from rugby as much as I could or should. In terms of the energy side of things, so if I'm having a tough week, and we all have it, with mentally you're tired out. It's been a crap week at work, or you're just a bit fatigued, whatever. I always carry a notebook with me. And I just write down again operationally. So try and operationalize what I'm doing, what I want to get out of this session, so I can give half an hour, 45 minutes of real focus, this is my goal. So always set that goal for the session, and that automatically kind of energizes you a little bit, because again, you're then on task. You now know specifically what I want to get out of it. If you go into a session going, I just want to have a good session, really, they're the sessions that are never going to be the best, because you're not focused. So always try and give myself a goal and a focus, and then always just write down a couple of things that I really enjoy about the game, or really enjoyed about the last week of coaching, whether it's seeing a player who hasn't been in the squad for 4 or 5 weeks, just hasn't quite made the cut. Last couple of weeks they've trained really well, so we're going to give them an opportunity this weekend to play. That's going to make their week, and that's going to give me a real bit of positive energy. So making sure, like I say, have a target, have a goal, have a focus for that session, and then look on a sort of weekly scale of what am I really grateful for, what am I really enjoying about my coaching. And then once you do that, you can do it in the car on the way there, or in your head, or what you're just pre-session of a little notebook. That for me allows me then to just be energized, and you can think, right, okay, let's get after it. And then once you're done, you can then, if you are really tired, you can then just crash, and then you pick yourself up again for the next one. But ultimately, if you have that sort of week on week focus, session by session focus, it allows you to keep energized.
That's a fantastic bit of advice. Just getting it out of your head there and into a book is just like a nice little trigger almost to sort of reset and go again. So
Sorry, I was going to. I think, and players also react to it as well. Like I said from Tommy, like the way that he energized players, the way that he was able to bring energy, they reacted to it, and you see that in sessions. If you go to a session and you're a bit of a bad mood, the players, particularly in the pathway program, they're like sponges. They'll pick up on it. If you're in a bit of a downer, they'll pick up on it. So always try and think about, okay, you're here to coach, here to provide value for players. Here's my target. Here's what I'm grateful for. Let's get after it.
Yeah, fantastic. Now then, one other environment you're involved in as well is women's rugby. I've coached a tiny amount of it, but almost none really. What are the differences? What are the things that you really enjoy about coaching women?
Do you know what? So going into it, and I was lucky enough to obviously at Quins working with Gary Street, who obviously won the World Cup with England women. So probably no better person to have the ear of to speak to going into it. And he just gave me one really good bit of advice, and it's about the difference between motivations between the women's game and the men's game, and it's how you can then tap into that to communicate effectively with them. And it's true, because what I've seen is, after a game, if a male player goes into a game feeling good, then they're likely to play good. Whereas in the women's game, a lot of the time, they need to play really well to then feel good. It's the reverse process. And I've seen it with a real light bulb moment this season. Actually, was 4 or 5 players after a game where we narrowly lost to Kent. It wasn't a huge loss. It was a really competitive fixture, and we had 7 or 8 players who made their county debut. They're all kind of in the 19, 20, 21 years old. Some are older. But 4 or 5 players come up to me and said, what did I do wrong? Tell me what I did wrong. I thought it was a really interesting point. I've never had that experience before of people sort of so proactively seeking a negative reinforcement. And so a lot of the time I spent was working on, okay, just flip it. Okay, what did you do really well? Rather than thinking about what you didn't do, think about the 3 aspects of the game that you smashed. Make sure that next week you go and smash them even more, and you can then capitalize on your positives rather than always focusing on the negatives. It was a really, really interesting point. And the other classic you always get is, in the women's game, the women like to ask more questions, and I think that's brilliant. I love that, because you always say to a group of players when you're setting up a session, any questions, and 9 times out of 10 in the men's game, tumbleweed goes across. No one says it, and then they go and do something completely different. You think, right, well, if you'd asked the question, we wouldn't. But always, the women's game, they want to know every bit of information, every bit of detail, and that challenges me as a coach, because if you go into, particularly in a sort of county environment where you've got very experienced, good women's players who are then thirsty for that information, if you come in ill prepared, you're going to get found out real quick. So the key thing I would say for women's coaching is make sure that your detail is spot on, and actually just really look about what you can learn from them, because they're so inspirational, because they haven't got the funding, they haven't got the years of experience or the facility experience that the men do, with even little things, like changing rooms. Some clubs don't have women's changing rooms, so it's then about juggling. They just deal with it. They just get on with it. Or they're there to play rugby and they love it. And so for me, that's been a really positive learning experience for sure.
Fantastic. Okay, that's a lovely way to bring this part of the show to an end. So we'll move on to the stash section now, Tom. So what's your favourite bit of stash that you've ever received?
Favorite bit of stash that I've ever received. For me, probably from a personal point of view, was when I got my stash bundle for county when I played for the men's county team. Because like I say, a pretty average player. Didn't expect ever to play in a county environment. So when I was working with, it was actually Ross Chisholm, who's now the women's coach, one of the women's coaches at Quins. He was doing the county that year. Gave me the opportunity, so had got 2 caps, and you get your stash bundle, and I thought, this is cool. I've achieved something really, really quite big here, and I'm quite pleased about it. And I still have that kit. Don't wear, obviously it's playing kit. I've got the coaching kit now, but the playing kit, that for me was a real moment of, okay, I've achieved something quite cool. I'm really pleased with this.
Fabulous. I love it. It's achievement based as well. That's quality. Yeah. Now then, what about your favourite kit of all time? This can be any team from any era.
Favourite kit of all time? I mean, it's probably asked, there's quite a few, English rugby players that would say the same thing. For me, that 2003 World Cup kit has got to be up there, because just the iconic, how it was the first one, really one of the first ones of the skin tight jerseys. Proper sort of look professional rather than the sort of long sleeve, big, thick jumper jerseys. And then obviously what the team went on to go and do was a massive moment for me, watching that when I was 7, 8 years old, watching England win the World Cup. I firmly believe that if we hadn't won the World Cup, I probably wouldn't be as invested in rugby as I was from that moment on. So just what that kit kind of holds and what it did for me as a fan watching it really energized me to go and get into rugby. So probably the England shirt from 2003, but also then there's a few really cool kits. I mean, I used to love the old Wasps jerseys, the sort of baggy ones where there was no sponsor. It was just, the Canterbury logo and the Wasp logo, black with the little collar. I used to wear that all the time when I was younger.
Yeah, that's a good one for sure. What about awful kits? Are there any ones you hate out there at the moment?
There's definitely a few dodgy kit men out there, I think, in the game at the minute. There's a few shirts out there, a bit sort of a bit out there. I think probably at the moment the one that I actually get most people sort of moaning about is probably the England kit at the moment, with the red sort of dripping down the sort of on the bottom bit of it. People sort of look at it and a lot of people ask me, what's that for? Is that for? I'm like, no, that's just design inspiration. So I wouldn't be buying that replica. Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't be buying that replica jersey anytime soon. I think the Umbro deal, I think, is actually quite cool. Some of the kits they've done with Umbro look all right, but this new one, wasn't an enormous fan. And particularly, I think they retail at like £100 or something in the shop there. So I certainly won't be getting one of those.
Yeah, listen up, Umbro. I completely agree. Actually, I was a little bit in two minds about Umbro at the start, but they did produce some good kit. But the latest one, it's no good for me. That's for sure.
Yeah, they missed the mark, I think, unfortunately. But like we always say in coaching rugby, you're only as good as your last one. So they've got a big job to do to fix it.
For sure. Okay, as we bring this to a close, Tom, is there anything else you'd like to sort of add, or any closing thoughts about anything we've talked about?
Just that, for all, I think, because it's now, it's now sort of coming to the end of May. So if there are any amateur coaches out there who are looking for things to do at the end of the season, one thing that I find really useful is just doing a little short review. I mean, I know we're all super busy, so you don't want to spend an hour, you don't want to write a novel about it, but just think about 5 things you learned through the season and try and split them from things you sort of learned from your own sort of experience, whether it was watching YouTube videos or podcasts or whatever, but also things you learned from co-coaches and players, so you can see what value you've gained from the season. Think about then what you feel like the players got out of it, and a really good thing to do is send a feedback form, to players. Did you find the sessions engaging? Were they fun? These are sort of, rather than think about, do you now understand what a 1-3-3-1 looks like? It is, did you enjoy your season? Did you have fun? Did I engage properly with you? Having that feedback from players is really, really crucial. But also, as I say, things that you've actually learned as well. So you're always going to get that feedback, and it might be sometimes positive feedback, sometimes negative feedback, but be open to it. But then to mitigate that sort of that challenge of feedback is always, okay, what have I personally got out of this season? Have a bit of downtime, and then think about going into next season. What are the 5 things I want to get out of this one going forward? So you've always got that sort of preview, review focus. And yeah, for coaches doing that, I think it's always good. I know a lot of clubs have their end of season dinners. So your coaching group, just have a beer and whatever, and sit down and go, okay, 5 things we learned. how's our feedback looking? What do we want to get out of next year? And it kind of, like I say, it re-energizes you for the off in July, September, whenever it is you get going.
Fabulous bit of advice. It's almost like putting a full stop at the end of one season, isn't it? And then before you have your break and then move on to the next one. And of course, it's very easy to forget your learnings, isn't it, by the start of next season? So to write it down immediately is a great piece of advice. Now, Tom, if people want to get hold of you, what is the best way that they can do that?
Yeah, I mean, please do feel free to reach out because, I love talking about rugby, and I'm always keen to learn from different people, different environments. So LinkedIn or Twitter, Tom Hicks MSc is probably the best place to find me there for sure. And yeah, like I say, please do reach out. I'm more than happy to have a chat.
Fantastic. And if people want to find out more about the Sevens team that you're running at the moment, what's that for?
Yeah, so the Return to Our Sevens is under the username at Try for Matt, and you can find all the stuff about what the foundation does. So doing some really good work with giving opportunities within rugby to people who may not have the opportunity to experience it. And then obviously, what we're doing with the Sevens program with Tom and Ollie is brilliant. So yeah, Try for Matt is the place to find us there.
Fantastic. And we will link all of that up in the show notes, which can be found at one place at amateurrugbypodcast.com. So, Tom, it just leaves me to say thank you so much for your time today. It's been a really fun and interesting chat.
No, thank you so much. I've really, really enjoyed it. Thank you very much for having me on.
You are welcome. Now, there he goes. What a brilliant conversation there. So many interesting things across all kinds of different coaching realms, and just a ton of great advice. So thank you once again for that, Tom. Now, we are in great rugger run season and training is progressing once more. I'm up to 5 runs a week now for my 1,000 kilometre run from West Wales all the way to the West Country in Gloucestershire in aid of the My Name's Doddy Foundation once again. This year it's happening from August 9th and finishing on September 2nd. So any support you can do would be massively appreciated. You can find out absolutely everything on the website, which is thegreatruggerrun.org. The podcast is active on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. So make sure you go and follow over there. Just search for Amateur Rugby Podcast for some other stuff as well. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, you could rate, review on your podcast player. You can like, share, retweet, or even join the community at patreon.com/Amateur Rugby Podcast. But what I'd really like is if you mention it to someone in person the next time you're down your local rugby club. So until then, get out and play.